So there's phase 1, which is known as ventricular filling. Then there's phase 2, and phase 2 is referred to as the isovolumetric phase of systole. Phase 3, the ventricular ejection phase of systole. And then there's phase 4, known as the isovolumetric phase of diastole. In this diagram, I'm going to indicate also where diastolic blood pressure and systolic blood pressure are located. We'll talk about the concept of work. That's where we'll end kind of the introduction component. And then hopefully you'll be able to use a simulator. And the simulator should be able to work on the computers that we have underneath the desk here or any window-based PC. So that's the game plan. Let me go ahead and mute that. So you got your algorithm. It says that cardiac output is equal to heart rate times stroke volume. And stroke volume is determined by EDV, the difference between EDV minus, let me re-say that, the difference between EDV and systolic volume. So we've got this diagram. We also have our cardiac cycle diagram. Where we've got diastole. Remember, under resting conditions, diastole represents about 60% of the cardiac cycle, and systole represents the remainder, about 40%. That's why I keep drawing the arcs for these different phases to be of different length. And for the pressure volume diagram, we're going to come along and we're going to plot ventricular volume on the x-axis. And for us, we're talking about left ventricular volume. This is going to be in milliliters. So we're going to start out at 0 and go in increments of 50. On the y-axis, we're going to plot left ventricular pressure. And this is going to be in units of millimeters of mercury. And again, I'm just going to go up in increments of 50, starting out at 0. Do yourself a big favor, make sure you understand the units on the last test. There were some of you, not a lot, but there were a few of you who were using the wrong units to describe various measurements. It's simple, just make sure you know the math and you know the units. You'll fly through parts of the test that involve those. So we got pressure on the y-axis in units of millimeters of mercury. So we're going to start out in our diagram, our cardiac cycle, we're starting out right here at the beginning diastole. Or, different way of saying it, the very end of systole. So here we are, right at 50 milliliters, and that's your end systolic volume. So here in green, I'm just going to put ESV, and systolic volume. So just to reiterate what I said, we're here on that diagram. And now we enter into diastole. And during diastole, you have ventricular filling. And by definition, the volume of blood in the left ventricle is going to increase. And our standard textbook value for end diastolic volume is 120 milliliters of blood. This is phase 1 of the pressure volume diagram. And on the outline ahead for you, the term that we give to phase 1 is ventricular filling. Tim? What's the position of the left AV valve during ventricular filling?
Open.
Fantastic. Asa, what's the position of the aortic valve during ventricular filling? It is, that's right, very good. Very good. All right, so that's phase 1. Phase 2 is known as the isovolumetric phase of systole. That's a good term. Iso, same volume. I'm going to come in and I'm going to put in standard textbook values for blood pressure. So I'm going to put a dashed line right about here. And this is our diastolic blood pressure. And I'm going to put another dashed line in here, right at about 120 millimeters of mercury, and that's going to be our systolic blood pressure. Let me just repeat what I said earlier. The diastolic blood pressure is the afterload. That's the force that the left ventricle has to produce to get the aortic valve to open up. Systolic blood pressure is simply the peak pressure during systole. And what we're talking about, just so I'm very clear on this, all these pressures are aortic pressures. One of the things that kills me when I go for a checkup is they come along and they measure my blood pressure. Quick question for you, Mr. Maka, since you've got anatomy on Friday related to the heart. Which of these two vessels is closest to the heart? Because blood pressure, let me just be very clear, is all about trying to get a sense of the work that the left ventricle is producing. So logic would have it that you want to make your measurement as close to the left ventricle as possible, right? If you want to see what the left ventricle is doing, you want to be as close as you possibly can to the left ventricle. Simple test question. Am I going to measure the blood pressure on the brachial artery of the left arm, or am I going to measure pressure in the brachial artery of the right arm? What's your answer? Yeah, the left arm. My heart's over here, right? It's not over here. And so it just cracks me up when you go in and these folks are measuring your blood pressure on the right arm instead of the left arm. It's not consistent from one visit to the next, you know? And I want to sit there and go, excuse me, but I always keep my mouth shut. But for any of you who are going to record blood pressure, you're going to be good physiologists, and you're always going to be recording blood pressure here rather than over here. Oh. All right. So here's what's happened. Here's phase one. And now we get right here. We're at the end of diastole. And from an electrophysiological perspective, Mr. Ramos, what is the electrophysiological event that's going to occur right here at the very, very, very beginning of systole? Perfect. You said the QRS complex. Because the QRS complex represents depolarization of the ventricles, right? So I like these diagrams. There's so much logic in them. Here I'm going to put QRS complex. In skeletal muscle land, you learn there are 4 boxes. Excitation. Excitation, contraction, coupling. Contraction, and relaxation. The only way we can get our muscle to contract is we have to first excite it. What's the part of the EKG that represents excitation of the left ventricle or the right ventricle? The answer is the QRS complex. That's why it's right here before cardiac muscle ever begins to contract. Well, now, the force in the ventricle or the pressure in the ventricle increases. Let me just put arrows in here so it's clear the direction that we're moving through this pressure volume diagram. And you'll notice that in the second phase, that there's no change in the volume of blood in the left ventricle. Hence, we refer to this as phase 2 of the pressure volume diagram. And this is known as the isovolumetric. Oh, no, it's good. Phase of systole. Bless you. How do we know that we're in systole? And the answer is simple. Because pressure's going up. And the only way pressure can be going up is if the heart's contracting. What's the position of the left AV valve during phase 2? Very good. And what's the position of the aortic valve during phase 2? Right? We're in logic 101 land. The only way the volume of blood in the left ventricles can stay constant is if both valves are closed. If the aortic valve is open during phase 2, then the volume of blood would be going up, right? It would be going down. Yes, it would. So that term, isovolumetric, is a beautiful term because it says there's no change in ventricular volume, and the only way that can happen is if both valves are closed. Let me come along and add a little word in here. Afterload. Yes or not? Now we're concerned about afterload because that impacts what important contractile property, cardiac muscle. Just your body. Batter up. Ms. Rodriguez.
Is it the end-diastolic volume?
No. Ms. Sue. Luis. The force velocity relationship, right? Force velocity relationship. Well, as soon as the left ventricle produces a pressure that's greater than the diastolic blood pressure, you're all going to tell me that the aortic valve is going to open up, right? And so as soon as it opens, then we're going to eject blood out. Here I'm going to put phase 2 right here. So now we're in systole. Now we're in phase 3 of the pressure volume diagram. This is ventricular ejection. What's the position of the left AV valve? Yep.
Closed.
It is closed. What's the position of the aortic valve?
Open.
It has to be, right? The only way you can get blood flow out is for the aortic valve to be open. So we've got closed, and open. Gosh, that almost looks like a table that could be on test number 4. Well, we get to the end of ventricular ejection. Let's see here, what color am I going to use? I guess I have to go back to the red here. So in phase 4, what's happening? So ventricle contracting. Is it relaxing? Should be obvious to all of you. What's happening to the ventricle? Contracting or relaxing?
Relaxing.
It's relaxing, that's right. So what are we going to call this phase? And the answer is, we're going to call it the isovolumetric phase of what?
Diastole.
Very good. So we've got phase 4. Which is the isovolumetric phase of diastole. Miss Megan, what's the position of the left AV valve? Thumbs up. What's the position of the aortic valve? 2 thumbs up. That was good. So, beginning tonight, what's our textbook value for end diastolic volume? And the answer is 50 milliliters of blood. What's our textbook value for the end? Back up. Time out. Time out. Shame on me. Try that again. 120 milliliters of blood. That's our textbook value for end diastolic volume. Our textbook value for end systolic volume is 50 milliliters of blood. Jamie, what's our textbook value for stroke volume? It is, except it's not 70, it's 70 milliliters up. Right. There you go. Good. What's the range of normal heart rate? The answer is 60 to 100 beats per minute. But what we're going to say is that our textbook value for resting heart rate, we're going to say, is right around 70 beats per minute. Stephen, what's our textbook value for cardiac output?
Uh, 4,900 milliliters of blood per beats per minute. I don't know.
No.
Okay.
It's, you said 4,900 milliliters of blood per minute, right?
Yes, sir.
I like the way you said So our textbook value for cardiac output is this. It's 5 liters per minute. Now you might sit there and say, well, wait a minute, Stephen said that it was 4,900. Well, we're approximators. We don't need to be that specific. Now, there could be a question on the test, or somebody might at your 4th of July party come up and go, hey, Luis, you know, I heard you took physiology. I love physiology, but I really don't know that much. Did you ever learn anything about the heart? And you say, oh, yeah, we learned so much. It's so cool. Right? All your friends are going to do that, right? He's going to say, yeah, one of the things I learned that a normal cardiac output is 5 liters per minute. Mrs. Jones, our 80-year-old who's in heart failure, she has a cardiac output of 2 liters per minute. Her oxygen delivery is down by how much?
60%.
Very good, excellent. He says down by 60%. Mrs. Jones is on her way out. All right, now, so you can see that this diagram, our algorithm is kind of building and getting deeper and deeper and deeper. All these things you need to know for test number 4. One of the other things that I mentioned to you is that our muscles produce force, they can produce length changes, and they do work. So we can write simple formulas like this one. We could say that work, W, capital W, is equal to force times delta L. That's good. But when talking about the heart, we need to know how much work does it do per unit of time, because that's what determines cardiac output. The amount of work your heart does per minute determines cardiac output. So power, which is W dot. Remember, anytime you see a dot above the symbol, that means per unit time. So we're reading that W dot as work per unit of time, or power. And that equals F times delta L could be per second per minute. But for us, the heart does what we call pressure volume work. So for the heart, the work that it does is pressure times the change in volume. The power that the heart produces is our force, that's pressure, times the change in volume per unit of time. And that change in volume per unit of time, cardiac output. The area inside this curve is the amount of mechanical work that the heart is doing. Okay, let's revisit this now, or come back to this. Earlier tonight, we were talking about Mrs. Jones. She is a patient at the Taw Medical Clinic. And you'll recall that she's suffering from hypertension. And what was the value that gave you for her blood pressure? Anybody? 180 over? Over 95, right? So let's plot that up here and see what's going on. So I'm going to come along. Let me do this. I guess I'm going to do this in black. So we're coming up to 95, which we'll say is right about here. This is our, I'm going to put DBP prime. And the systolic pressure is going up to a value of 180. Well, what's happened to the amount of work that her heart is doing?
Increasing.
Ms. Sue, what would you tell me? Is the heart doing the same amount of work? Is it doing less work, or is it doing more work? It is doing more work, and as a matter of fact, we can be very quantitative about it and sit there and say that the amount of the work that the heart is now doing has increased by that much. So now we have to think about the clinical significance of this. We've got this elderly person, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Jones, excuse me. Mrs. Smith's no longer with us. She's got this failing heart. She's got hypertension. Philip, there are 3 primary risk factors for the development of heart disease. What are they?
High cholesterol, smoking, and hypertension.
Fantastic. And so she's suffered from decades of hypertension. And we've imaged her heart, and we know that her coronary arteries, you're going to be looking at that this Friday, right? Make sure you pay attention to those coronary arteries. She's got 95% blockage of her, what's the name of that major blood vessel going right down the front of the heart? That's called the circumspect coronary artery. Who in here is brave enough to admit they had an ME last semester? What's that?
I don't think they have to know that.
You didn't have to know that? Come on. There's this thing called the LAD. What is it, Dr. Todd?
Left anterior disc.
Yeah, you know what that's called? It's called the Widowmaker. What does that mean? That means that if you block that blood vessel, good luck, because you're on your way out of here. It's the Widowmaker. That provides blood to the left ventricle and the right ventricle. Well, to the left ventricle. And remember, the left ventricle is pumping blood to the rest of the heart. So here's the thing. I've got this blockage, this narrowing of the left anterior descending coronary artery. That means the flow of blood through there is being obstructed. Some of you say it's being restricted. It's being obstructed. And so as soon as we start talking about flow of gases and fluids through vessels, you're thinking about this very important law, which is beep, beep, help me out here, hurry up. Starts with the O, ends with the M. Ohm's law. And if resistance goes way up, then flow rate goes way down. And if flow rate goes down, what else goes down? Come on, what's your blood carrying?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. And this ventricle, is it burning up more ATP or less ATP?
More.
More. It's burning up a lot more. That's the last thing we want to have happen, Miss Jones, because she has very little reserve capacity. And this hypertension pushes her over the edge. And her oxygen demand exceeds the oxygen delivery. And now she's sitting there going beep, beep, beep. Man, you come walking on in there, you're going, okay, let's get going on this. We got to get a cart down here. So why do we care about high blood pressure? Because it increases the energetic demands on the heart. And in elderly people, their reserve capacity has collapsed as a result of aging. Sad to say, it's going to happen to all of you. And the people who live nice long lives, they've got this really nice reserve capacity. But the ones who kind of check out early, that reserve capacity is collapsed on them. Okay, let me see if I can get this program to run now. What I need you guys, yes, go ahead.
Just on the table, that should say closed down there, right? For the aortic valve in phase 4.
Good catch, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good catch. Thank you. Okay. If you go out to the Canvas website under course contents, down at the bottom, you're going to see a file that says PV. Hold on for just a second. Got to log back in here. Did you see it?
I do see it. I tried executing the file and it's not.
It won't work.
And
PV model 67B-EXE. Anybody that's got a Windows system, try to see if you can get that to open up.
Mine's also good.
It won't either? Okay. All right.
Upstairs, please.
Just say that every time.
Would you guys try putting this guy up and see if you... Anybody else have a Windows computer? So far we got 2 strikes.
I tried it.
Didn't work? Right. Go ahead and give that a shot.
I'll go.
It's on.
I can't use this. It's a window well top. I'm gonna use mine. Does this thing even